Hi, everybody, and welcome to the weekly message for The Table. The Table is a church in Davenport, Iowa, where people are moving from greed toward generosity, from violence toward peacemaking, from isolation toward neighborliness, and from fear toward faith. I'm Pastor Rob Leverage, and it is good to be with you on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. Our scripture today is from the Gospel of John. Like last week, this is another teaching where Jesus actually gives a teaching about himself. And this is the teaching about the vine and the branches. So let's open our hearts and our ears and give a good listen. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You've already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, if you are in eastern Iowa, the weather has been extraordinary. It's been magnificent here in Davenport, in eastern Iowa on the Mississippi River. And this is gardening weather, you guys. I don't know if anybody watching this message is excited about gardening, growing food. We're big into the gardening at my house. We have quite an expanding catalog of both vegetables and flowers, and the number of garden beds that I'm constructing is growing year after year after year. And I've actually started to wonder, is there an official, agreed upon point at which a person has grown so much produce that they are no longer considered a gardener and have become a farmer? I don't know. But if there is such a line that you cross, I wonder how close I am to that line. This thought crosses my mind. Anyway, so this time of year, when people are digging around in the dirt and investing time and technique in growing things up from the ground, right? This is the perfect time to talk about Jesus the vine and God the vine grower. Okay, the gardener, the farmer. Now, if you're at least somewhat familiar with some of the Bible, you may have taken note that this teaching from the Gospel of John is certainly not the only time in the Bible when God is described as an agricultural practitioner, a farmer, a gardener, a vine grower. It really happens over and over, especially in the Gospels. So in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's the parable of the sower, which describes a farmer casting seed into different kinds of soil. The parable of the growing seed in Mark chapter 3 describes this divine miracle of growth that the planter does not actually comprehend fully. There's the image of the wheat and the chaff, separating the wheat and the chaff from Matthew chapter 3. And that's a way of describing the process of separating truth from falsehood. The list goes on. Okay. The emphasis of our teaching today from John's Gospel is about the vines and the branches. The emphasis is on the bearing of fruit. Okay, that's the takeaway message. The branches of a vine are evaluated according to what they produce, and the vine grower, that's God, tends to the branches, pruning them and arranging them to help them grow more and more fruit. And of course, the only way that the branches can live and bear fruit is for them to remain connected to the vine, the Jesus vine. Okay, so in the rich symbolism of this teaching, right, Christ is this sturdy and stable, deeply rooted vine. Now, if you conjure up a mental image of a vine, I'm not sure what like the average person would picture, but you might picture branches, shoots, tendrils, the thin little wispy curls, that they grow out and they wrap around the wires of a fence or what have you. And then there might be the luscious leaves and, if you're lucky, some delectable looking fruit, hanging off of the vine. So if you're thinking of that, when you think of a vine, you might not so quickly think about the base of the vine, right? The sturdy trunk, which is, if we're talking about grapevines, that's really a lot like the base of a tree. It's hard. It's wood. It arises from an expansive root system beneath the dirt. Okay, so in our scripture, when Jesus describes himself as the vine, he's actually referring to himself as this base. Okay, this stalk, this sort of fundamental kind of like center point of the plant, the living core, and all of the extremities that grow out from there, the shoots and the limbs and the leaves, these are the people who hear his words. Okay? Now, so the scripture emphasizes that the branches cannot live if they are cut off from the vine. Now, we know this from, intuitively and from our life experience. If you pluck a leaf off of a plant, any plant, it might be green for a little while and then it dries out dead. But we also know, right, that the trunk of a plant, the trunk of a tree, the trunk of a vine, the center of a sturdy plant, it doesn't just give life to the appendages in a unidirectional way. The vine, right, the sturdy stalk of the vine itself receives the nourishment of sunlight and water from its leaves and its roots. So the vine needs the branches too. Right? The branches can't live without the vine, but the vine lives because of the branches as well. Okay? And that's an important reminder for us. We kind of need to get a little bit of that reminder from time to time when we think about God's grace and the love of Jesus and the power of God and things, these things, because God's grace is at work, right? It's at work in the world. But we are members of Christ's body. It's our hands and it's our time and it's our energy and our resources that are commissioned for Christ's cause of love, right? So the vine needs the branches too, even as the branches cannot live cut off from the vine. Okay, which brings us to the more important lesson of this passage, which is the purpose, right? The purpose of the life and the growth that the vine grower is trying to facilitate. This growth that the vine grower wants to see, because the vine does not exist only to source the branches, nor the branches only to source the vine. I mean, for aesthetically speaking, for the vine and its branches to live and simply be and have it be beautiful, I mean, that's wonderful, but it is not all that the grower intends. The vine grower wants the vine and the branches to bear fruit, right? So what does that mean exactly? I mean, we're talking about religious symbolism here. So what does it mean to bear fruit, as the scripture says in this particular passage? I'd like to explore two meanings of that. Okay, two ways to understand this desire that the vine grower has for the vines to bear fruit. So the first is the fruit of the harvest. Okay, and when I say the fruit of the harvest, I'm referring to, what do you take away from the plant? That it's some form of provision, some form of nourishment. It's a resource, it's a commodity, it's something that the plant gives up, and you can take it, and it can be good. You derive a benefit from it, right? So this would be the grapes that people eat, or the grapes that people make into wine. Now, I always assume that we're talking about grapevines here, and I've shown a bunch of pictures of grapevines, but, technically, the Bible does not say that the vine in this story is a grapevine. Melons grow on vines. Kiwi, we could be talking about Jesus the kiwi vine, or Jesus the dragon fruit vine. I always assumed it was a grapevine. But I only wish to point out that when the scripture says the vines ought to bear fruit, one way to understand this is to think of it in terms of what is harvested. Okay, what the farmer takes away and can sell or feed to people, or what the plant gives to the world that is good and useful. Okay, so there's a different gospel passage from the Gospel of Matthew, which is actually kind of completely separate from the passage that we read today from John, unless you're looking for a definition of the fruit of the vine, okay, that Jesus is describing. So in Matthew chapter 11, some people come and they ask Jesus some questions, and they're asking on behalf of John the Baptist. John the Baptist is in prison, and he sends some people to talk to Jesus. And they basically ask Jesus, they say, "Are you the person that we have been waiting for, or should we be waiting for somebody else?" Okay, this is what people come and ask Jesus, and they're asking for John. And Jesus' response is, "Go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind are made to see, the sick are healed, and the poor have good news proclaimed to them." And basically what he's saying to these people, he's asking to be judged by the outcome of his work. So this is an example, this is a way that we could understand the fruit of the harvest. Jesus, the vine, right? He's saying, okay, the good things offered up by the vine, nourishing, life-giving, sustaining gifts to the world. The blind are made to see, the hungry are getting lunch, right? The outcasts are being welcomed, the fruit of the vine, okay? Christ, the vine, we, the branches, are commissioned. We are sent to bless and heal and feed and share and welcome. The example that Jesus gave throughout his life, his way, his love for the world, this pursuit of the common good, this is the fruit of the vine, the fruit of the harvest, right? Something you can take away, or that the world takes away because of our living, right? And can consume and be blessed and strengthened, right? And so you and I can ask ourselves if the world is receiving fruit like this from our lives, from us doing our thing, right? And if so, we can trust that this spurs delight in the vine grower. If we are not bearing the fruit of kindness and peacemaking and healing and generosity, and if we are not giving fruit for people to harvest throughout the world, this scripture says that a restored connection to Christ the vine is a means of a new and restored fruitfulness. Okay? So that's the first understanding of what it means to be fruitful, that God the vine grower is tending to branches to ensure fruit for harvest. Okay? That's the first understanding. But there is another understanding, there is another purpose for fruit born of trees and vines. It's often overlooked, in fact, by all of us who just like to eat figs and oranges and pears and grapes. I mean, for example, if I ask you, what is the purpose of an apple tree? I don't know what you'd say, but a lot of people would say, well, the purpose of an apple tree is to grow delicious apples, right? It's to produce apples. And that's a quite reasonable thing to say from the point of view of humans who like to eat apples. Sure. Okay. Right? We want to take away and consume, right, the resources of all of the things that a tree produces. That's what we expect to get from a tree, an apple tree. But from the point of view of the tree, right? From the perspective of the tree itself, the purpose of an apple tree is to produce more apple trees. Yeah. The apple itself is not really the point, from the apple tree's perspective, right? Apple trees don't eat apples, right? From the tree's point of view, the apple is simply a vessel for the seed, right? The apple is a delivery system. It is the means of planting the seed so you can grow more apple trees. That's the same with grapes on the vine, strawberries in the patch, right? The fruit facilitates the passing on of seeds, the beginnings of new life, which is a multiplication of the source of the fruit. Okay? So if we think about bearing fruit in this way, it's a little different, right? Then we aspire as branches of the Christ vine not only to give people something useful for their strength and their healing and their encouragement, but also to multiply, right? To multiply the goodwill that was instilled in us, okay? To reproduce the loving kindness present in our individual giving and serving and helping. So if you make bread, right, and you give it to people in need, that's a beautiful thing, and that's absolutely wonderful. Do you also teach other people how to make bread, right? And do you teach them that it is good and right to give bread to the hungry? Okay? Yeah, right? That would be not just bearing your own fruit for harvest, but bearing fruit that will multiply. If you stop and help somebody with a flat tire on the highway, right? That's wonderful. That's awesome. I myself have been helped by individuals, strangers who stopped on the highway to help me with a flat tire. Right? If that's something that you do you also teach people how to help themselves and their neighbors deal with flat tires? And do you teach them that they should stop and help when they see somebody on the side of the road, right? Okay, so obviously this applies across the board to every area of life. It definitely applies to another teaching that Jesus gave, right? At the very end of the Gospel of Matthew, this is actually after the resurrection, Jesus told his disciples, he said, "I will be with you always, even to the end of the age." Okay? It's a very special, personal moment between him and them. Okay? But their life and their ministry together had not reached its completion in the abiding relationship that they were able to have with Jesus personally. No. In this way, really, Jesus did not want the disciples to think of themselves as special. Far from it. Actually, he was giving them a responsibility, and their responsibility was to invite more and more people to learn about and to know Jesus through their witness. Okay, so he said, "I want you to make disciples from every land that you travel to." He said, "I want you to multiply," right? I want you to multiply and expand the testament of God's grace, grow the testimony, and let more and more people have what you have been able to have, right? You guys are not the disciples, okay? You are disciples. And because you are disciples, there ought to be more disciples because you guys are bearing fruit. You follow? Okay. These two ways of bearing fruit, they're really not that hard to keep in mind as we go about our days and our years. We can ask first of all, am I bearing fruit for the harvest? Am I giving people something good and helpful that they can take away and benefit from, right? And we can also ask, am I bearing fruit for multiplication, right? Not just giving and serving of my own accord, right? But ensuring that there will be more and more people who can and will give and serve just like me. Okay? Bearing fruit. Okay. The promise of the Scripture is that if we remain connected to Christ the vine, right? If we are bonded, if we abide in him and allow him to abide in us, that we can and we will bear abundant fruit. Nothing could be more certain. But equally certain is the delight that we will bring to the vine grower. Thanks be to God. Amen.